Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
So picture this. You've got this huge drone flying way up high, miles above everything, and it opens up and out comes this massive swarm of smaller drones, maybe even 100 of them, plus missiles too.
Yeah, it sounds like sci-fi, almost. Like something designed purely to just overwhelm defenses.
Exactly. And that's pretty much the concept China has put forward for its new Jiutian SS UAV. It's being called the world's first drone mothership.
That's the term, yeah. A flying aircraft carrier for drones, essentially.
Right. Now, our source for today's deep dive is an analysis from the Eurasian Times, and it lays out the details. This thing is billed as a HALE UAV that's high altitude, long endurance,
Right.
designed to carry this massive payload, up to 100 smaller drones. Some are kamikaze types, apparently, and then also missiles air-to-air, air-to-ground, even anti-ship.
Wow, that's quite a mix. What about performance?
The claimed specs are, well, they're pretty impressive. A 7,000-kilometer range, 12 hours of flight time, and operating altitude around 15,000 meters. That's, nearly 50,000 feet?
That's very high, yeah. Stratospheric almost.
It popped up at the Zhuhai Air Show late last year, 2024. And the first flight is supposedly set for June 2025, so quite soon, actually.
The whole idea, the stated purpose, it's pretty ambitious. A central hub, way up in the sky, deploying, overwhelming force over huge distances.
But, and this is the crucial bit, our source, the Eurasian Times piece, it takes a very different view. The author is, let's say, highly skeptical.
Skeptical is putting it mildly, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It calls the Jiutian a flawed concept right off the bat and suggests it's more likely to be a sitting duck than a battlefield dominator.
Okay, so that's a pretty strong counter-narrative to the official hype.
Definitely. And exploring that skepticism, that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the arguments the source makes against all the hype. Is this drone mothership genuinely revolutionary, or is it, like the article suggests, fundamentally flawed, maybe more about sending a message than actual combat power?
Yeah, is it a game changer or just a big, vulnerable target?
Exactly. And digging into this kind of analysis, it's really important, whether you're tracking defense tech or maybe studying for exams like the UPSC, where understanding current affairs and strategic tech is key.
Or even if you just want to understand what's real and what might be, posturing in military news.
Right. So let's dive into the source material you provided and see why this apparently cutting-edge platform might have some serious issues, according to this analysis.
Okay, let's start with that core argument from the source, that the Jiutian SS UAV is a flawed concept, basically vulnerable. The article really doesn't hold back, saying it's probably a sitting duck in any real fight, even if it flies high.
Okay, so the high-altitude claim isn't enough for safety. Why does the source see it as so vulnerable?
Well, the main thing the article drills down on is its size and visibility versus actual defenses. I mean, this thing is big. An 82-foot wingspan, 16-ton empty weight. That's not small.
Not exactly stealthy, then.
Apparently not. The source quotes Tom Schugert, writing in Newsweek, who noted it doesn't appear to be particularly stealthy.
Right. So big and not stealthy. What does that translate to in a modern combat scenario?
It means it likely has a large radar cross-section. Basically, it lights up radar screens like a Christmas tree, which makes it, as the source puts it, a very visible, juicy target for any advanced detection systems out there.
Like the radar on modern fighter jets.
Precisely. The source specifically calls out threats like the US F-35, India's Rafale, even Taiwan's upgraded F-16s. These planes aren't just flying high, they carry really advanced weapons.
And the article mentions specific missiles these planes carry.
It does. It brings up the Meteor missile used by the Rafales. That thing has a range over 200 kilometers, uses a ramjet engine.
Ramjet. Okay. What does that mean in practice?
It means it's very fast and can maintain high speed and maneuverability even at the kind of high altitudes where the Jiutian would operate. Very hard to outrun or dodge.
So fighter jets are one threat. What about defenses from the ground?
Yeah, that's the other layer. High-altitude surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. Think systems like the Patriot PAC-E3. They're explicitly designed to take down targets exactly like this large, high-flying aircraft or drones.
So just flying high isn't the invisibility cloak it maybe once was?
Not in contested airspace against a modern, capable adversary, according to the source. And it's not just single systems. Adversaries have layered network defenses.
Right, like integrated air defense systems.
Exactly. Think about things like Aegis destroyers with their SM-6 missiles or land-based systems all talking to each other. The Jiutian wouldn't just face one threat. It'd be flying into this whole web of sensors and interceptors.
Okay, that makes sense. What about electronic warfare, jammers, and things like that? Can't they mess with its operation?
That's another critical point the article raises. Systems like India's D4 counter-drone system or the U.S. next-generation jammer, they're designed specifically to disrupt command and control links, GPS communications.
Even if the Jiutian has advanced comms, like quantum encryption.
The source argues that even advanced encryption isn't necessarily foolproof against sophisticated electronic attacks, like jamming or spoofing. And if the mothership can't reliably talk to or control its drones, well, the whole concept kind of falls apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, it becomes useless. So that analogy the source used, calling it a glorified cargo plane trying to play Rambo, instead of something stealthy like the RQ-170 Sentinel that seems to fit their vulnerability analysis.
Based on the arguments the source makes about its size, its lack of stealth, and the capabilities of modern defenses.
Yeah, that analogy seems to capture the essence of their critique pretty well. It's just too big and visible for the role it's meant to play, they argue.
Okay, vulnerability is a huge point. Let's shift to the second critique. The swarm itself. Launching 100 kamikaze drones, it sounds really intimidating, right, for distributed or saturation attacks. But the source thinks it's more show than substance. Yeah, the concept itself is definitely attention-grabbing. You imagine this cloud of small drones, maybe based on designs like the Iranian Shahed 136, which we've seen used effectively in other conflicts, just overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers, released from internal bays on the mothership.
But the article finds practical problems with these little drones.
It does. The source points out they likely have pretty limited range and endurance. I mean, think about it. They get dropped from the mothership. They need energy just to get up to speed and maintain altitude.
Right, they're not starting with full tanks on the runway.
Exactly. Tom Shigert is quoted again, expressing skepticism about their fairly short range.
Yeah.
The implication being they might not be able to fly very far on their own after launch. Maybe not far enough to cross significant distances, like, say, the Taiwan Strait.
And the source also pushes back on the idea that just having 100 drones automatically overwhelms modern defenses. It's not just about quantity.
That's a really crucial insight from the article. Counter-drone tech is evolving incredibly fast, specifically because of swarm threats. The source brings up India's D4 system again, citing this specific event, Operation Sindoor, in May 2025.
Operation Sindoor, what happened there, according to the source?
The article claims it successfully neutralized over 50 incoming drones and even some Chinese-supplied missiles, supposedly, in a single engagement overnight.
Wow, over 50 threats. That suggests these counter-swarm systems are becoming quite capable.
It really demonstrates that layered defenses using integrated sensors, jammers, maybe hard-kill interceptors, can be very effective against large numbers. And it's not just India. China itself has systems like the bullet curtain.
Bullet curtain.
Yeah, it's basically a close-in weapon system that fires bursts of 35-millimeter rounds to create this sort of lethal cloud to shred incoming drones or missiles. Other countries are working on lasers, advanced CIWS, close-in weapon systems. Think rapid-fire guns, short-range missiles.
Like the phalanx system on ships?
Sort of like that, yeah, but potentially networked and even more advanced for handling drone swarms. Modern defenses are explicitly being designed for this kind of threat.
So 100 drones might sound like a lot, but maybe not enough to guarantee success against these kinds of defenses.
The source basically argues you'd need way more, maybe hundreds if not thousands, to truly saturate a sophisticated modern air defense network. Far more than the Jiutian's supposed capacity.
And what about the drones themselves, their effectiveness?
Another point raised is payload. Kamikaze drones usually carry pretty small warheads. Good for, soft targets, maybe radar installations or vehicles, but probably not effective against hardened bunkers or major military facilities.
Right.
So the source's conclusion on the swarm is pretty stark. Once the Jiutian launches its limited number of relatively small payload drones, it's basically shot its bolt. It used up its main offensive capability.
And it's left flying high, big, and vulnerable.
Exactly. Becoming, as the source puts it, a one-trick pony with a very short leash.
That definitely paints a picture of significant risk. Okay, let's move on to the third point of critique in the article. The claim specifications. The performance numbers, 12 hours endurance, 7,000-kilometer range, 6-ton payload. The source questions if these are actually realistic.
Yeah, this is where the article does some back-of-the-envelope math, as they call it. They take the known empty weight, 16 tons, and add the claimed maximum payload, 6 tons. That brings the total weight up to 22 tons.
That's pretty heavy for a drone, even a large one.
It is. And the source raises a flag, questioning how a single rear thrust engine, as depicted in images, can efficiently propel that much weight, especially for a HAE platform that needs to be efficient for long endurance.
How does it compare to other similar drones?
Well, the article compares it implicitly to things like the US RQ-4 Global Hawk. Proven HALE UAVs exist, but carrying a 6-ton dedicated payload on a 16-ton airframe. That seems unusually high based on existing platforms.
Even with potential new tech like hydrogen fuel or better engines.
The source acknowledges those possibilities, but remains skeptical, basically saying physics is a harsh mistress. The numbers just seem very optimistic.
So the implication is that the actual performance, particularly when fully loaded, might be much lower than advertised.
That's the strong suggestion. The source argues that fully loaded, the real-world endurance and range will likely be far less than advertised, especially under combat conditions, maneuvering, climbing, dealing with winds. That 12-hour figure could shrink quite a bit.
And the payload itself. 6 tons sounds like a lot, but does it cover 100 drones and missiles?
That's another calculation the source does. Missiles are heavy. A PL-12E air-to-air missile is maybe 200 kilos. A 1,000-kilo bomb is, well, a ton. If the 100 drones weigh, say, 50 to 100 kilos each, as the source roughly estimates.
You hit that 6-ton limit pretty quickly with just the drones, let alone adding heavy missiles.
Exactly. Carrying a meaningful mix of both seems challenging within that limit. The source essentially argues that flying 7,000 kilometers carrying that much diverse ordnance is probably not feasible with current or near-term technology in that airframe.
Which leads the source to that rather pointed comment.
Yeah, that the specs sound like they were dreamed up in a propaganda office, not a testing ground. It captures their deep skepticism about whether these numbers are achievable in the real world.
And it highlights a trade-off, right? If it can't realistically carry everything claimed.
Then it has to choose. Does it prioritize the drone swarm, sacrificing missile capability, or carry more missiles but fewer drones? Either way, it undermines that whole multi-role versatility that's supposed to be its big selling point. The article contrasts this uncertainty with battle-proven platforms like the MQ-9 Reaper smaller payload, sure, but known reliable performance.
Okay, that skepticism about the basic performance feeds into the fourth critique. The strategic context and, well, the potential for propaganda. How does the source see the Jiutian fitting into China's bigger military picture?
Theoretically, it fits into China's A2AD strategy, that's anti-accessory denial. The idea of pushing potential adversaries further away from their shores. A long-range drone mothership deploying swarms or missiles could, on paper, support that. Think scenarios involving Taiwan or the South China Sea.
But again, the source questions the practical utility within that strategy.
Yes. The argument comes back to vulnerability. In any serious conflict against a peer or near-peer competitor, a big, non-stealthy platform like the Jiutian probably can't operate alone. It would need escorts.
Man fighters. Or maybe other drones.
Either way, the source calls this need for escorts a potential logistical nightmare. It ties up valuable fighter jets or other assets that are needed elsewhere just to protect this one vulnerable mothership.
And there's the fact that it's completely untested in actual combat.
That's a major question mark hanging over it. China seems to be investing a lot and publicizing a lot about a platform with zero combat record, intended for potentially very high-risk scenarios.
Does the source compare this approach to other drone development programs?
It briefly mentions the U.S. DARPA Gremlins program. The focus there is different launching smaller drones from a transport plane, but crucially, also recovering them. The source suggests this recoverable approach might be more flexible and sustainable in the long run, although it's also still developmental.
And the propaganda angle, the source seems to think that's a big part of the Jiutian story.
It's quite direct about that. It points to the heavy promotion in Chinese state media, CCTV, South China Morning Post, etc. The source labels this classic CCP posturing.
Meaning?
Announce some impressive-sounding new tech, show cool CGI animations, generate international buzz, perhaps aiming to deter rivals or boost national prestige, maybe even before the tech is fully proven or fielded in large numbers.
Is there pushback or skepticism visible elsewhere?
The source notes online skepticism, mentioning comments on platforms like X where users apparently called it big, slow, and not stealthy, with some even predicting, maybe cynically, that it might quietly crash during the test phase.
And the source draws parallels to other Chinese military projects that were heavily hyped.
It does. It links the Jiutian situation to things like the J-20 stealth fighter, which, despite being operational, has reportedly faced ongoing challenges, especially with its engines and maybe its true stealth capabilities. The article suggests the Jiutian feels like more of the same.
So expect potential delays, maybe performance issues, and a final reality that might be less impressive than the initial announcements.
That seems to be the underlying message from the source regarding the strategic and propaganda aspects. A degree of wait-and-see skepticism is warranted based on past patterns.
Okay, let's loop back to that crucial point about counter-drone tech. The source sees this as a major reality check for the whole Jiutian concept. Swarm tactics might be getting attention because of conflicts like Ukraine.
Right, we see drone swarms being used.
Mm-hmm.
But the source argues very strongly that counter-drone technology is advancing just as fast, if not faster. The defense is catching up, basically.
And we already talked about some examples.
Yeah, we mentioned India's D4 system, and that claims success in Operation Sindoor, taking out over 50 threats in one night. That's not theoretical. It suggests modern integrated defenses can handle swarm attacks effectively. And as we discussed, China itself is working on defenses like the bullet curtain.
Plus other nations developing lasers, better CIWS.
Exactly. The U.S. has laser programs. Israel's Iron Dome has shown effectiveness against drones. India's developing lasers too. The point the source drives home is this. The Jiutian's core strategy, overwhelming enemies with a swarm, assumes the enemy can be overwhelmed.
Oh.
But modern defenses are being specifically built not to be.
So the 100 drone swarm, instead of being this unstoppable force, actually just becomes a more complex target for defenses that are designed to handle exactly that.
That's the core argument. Networked radars track them, jammers disrupt them, interceptors shoot them down, and maybe most importantly, once those 100 drones are gone, what's left?
The mothership, high exposed.
And having likely given away its position by launching the swarm, it flips from being an asset to a major liability, according to the source's logic. The rapid rise of counter-drone capabilities really seems to undermine the whole rationale for putting such a big, valuable, non-stealthy platform relatively close to the fight just to launch a short-range swarm.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together from the Eurasian Times analysis. What's the final verdict on the Jiutian SSUAV, according to the source?
Well, the source's bottom line is pretty blunt. It concludes the Jiutian is more likely to crash into reality than dominate the skies. It frames the whole program as a potentially significant strategic gamble by China, one that might not ultimately pay off.
Can you quickly recap the main reasons the source gives for that pretty harsh assessment?
Sure. First, its fundamental vulnerability, big size, not stealthy, making it an easy target for modern fighters and SAMs. Second, the limited actual range and endurance of the small swarm drones it carries.
Yeah.
Third, the questionable, possibly exaggerated claims about its own payload capacity, range, and flight time. And fourth, the fact that its main tactic, the swarm attack, is facing rapidly evolving counter-drone technologies designed specifically to defeat it.
So essentially, the source sees it as what was the term they used? A paper tiger.
That's the phrase the source uses.
Yeah.
Looks fierce, sounds impressive in the announcements and parades, but the source believes it doesn't really hold up when you scrutinize the technical and tactical realities of modern warfare. And just to reiterate, this entire breakdown is based directly on that detailed critique published in the Eurasian Times.
And really digging into this kind of analysis, trying to separate the hype around new military tech from the potential realities and challenges that's so important for understanding what's actually happening. Whether you're trying to get a handle on global security, maybe preparing for exams like the UPSC that demand that kind of critical assessment of current affairs, or frankly, just trying to be an informed citizen cutting through the noise.
It's about looking past the flashy headlines, yeah. Looking at the underlying physics, the tactics, the counters.
So building on everything the source laid out, particularly that rapid evolution of counter-drone tech, here's maybe a final provocative thought drawn from the source material for you to consider. Will these big drone mothership concepts relying on mass swarms ever really be viable in a high-intensity fight against a prepared adversary? Or is the countertech evolving so fast that they might already be becoming outdated concepts, even before they properly take flight?
That's definitely a heavy question the source leaves you wrestling with.
Well, if you found this deep dive helpful for unpacking the complexities around the Jiutian SSUAV, please do take a second to like this discussion and subscribe for more.
And definitely let us know in the comments if you have more questions about this specific platform, or if there are other defense tech stories or sources you'd like us to tackle in a future deep dive.
Thanks so much for joining us.